Tulerie, and that's what all the clothing racks back there are for. So we connect women who love fashion so they can share clothing with each other.
I'm Whitney Olschwanger. I do personal shopping, and then I also do consulting for brands.
Hi everyone, my name is Aditi Meagher. I'm a sustainable fashion blogger, journalist, and labor organizer in downtown LA. I had my start in sustainability 6 years ago after the Rana Plaza factory collapse, which, if you're not familiar, was a factory, 8-story factory in Bangladesh that had structural cracks in it. No one cared. They said evacuate. They told the workers, go back to work. You have orders to finish for brands like H&M, Zara, Mango, Primark, and it collapsed. So when that happened, I started thinking critically about fashion's effect, especially on women of color globally. And I started a fashion blog my freshman year of college. That was a very organic growth throughout my college years. So what does sustainability look like? Not only like buy this, buy that, but as a lifestyle, right? I think a lot of the times we are told like sustainability is only something you have to buy, but I think that's quite false. It's a very Western notion that you always have to buy into it. It's a lifestyle. Since then, I do a lot of journalism and writing about the scene, social environmental impacts of fashion. I do a lot of work in downtown LA because we have a lot of sweatshops in our own backyard. Yeah, and I do a lot of speaking.
Awesome. It's really hard to follow that.
I know.
Thanks. Hi guys, I'm Syama. I'm the CEO of Scaling Retail, and these lovely ladies here are on all different sides of the business. I actually work with a lot of retailers and brands on scaling and launching their businesses, and one of the most exciting areas of business these days are really how to impact not only the fabrics that you're purchasing, but how do you actually look at the entire supply chain, and what are the different points and pillars that you want to launch and build sustainability around. There are so many different ways in which you can be sustainable, and I think one of the issues that I see are companies that are trying to tackle everything at once, and thereby kind of making prices quite expensive and not really democratizing what it might mean to have access to products that are healthy and sustainable. So that's me.
I'm Violet Gross, the other co-founder of Tulerie, and to the point you made earlier about starting in small steps in your everyday life, like that is what Tulerie is for the fashion girl, and how she can really start becoming sustainable in just in little small ways and little small things that she does every day in her life.
And I think I'm actually so happy you guys exist now selfishly. I really wish you were around when I was first starting this, because it was really difficult trying to make a commitment not to be purchasing things, but then having like a black tie wedding and you're like, I literally don't have that in my closet right now. And I don't want to go buy something that I'm going to wear one time and probably never again because I want it to be fashionable right now. And that's where I think that this concept's super interesting, because my friends didn't have black tie dresses. We were like 25 years old. We didn't have reasons to have black tie dresses. So can you guys talk a little bit more about like this idea of like having it be your best friend's closet, and how are you making sure that it's curated, that like I would know if I'm selling my stuff on there that someone's respecting it? And then also how you guys curate who the people are and the types of clothing, and are there any specific standards, and what's the best usage of it?
So I'll do a brief start and then you could kind of finish on what I miss. So Tulerie is peer-to-peer clothing rentals. So think of Airbnb meets Rent the Runway. So women in particular have billions of dollars of clothes sitting in your closets, and they just sit there because you wear it once and then you post it on Instagram, or you just didn't like the way it actually fit you when you wore it, so you never touch it again, or you just find the latest thing and you buy something else, and even though that one piece is only 3 months old, to you it's like ancient and you never want to wear it again, but even though you've been looking at it every day, it's brand new to other people. So we always use the concept of, or the notion of, 5 girls don't need to own the same skirt. We can own one and we can all share it, because you're not wearing it every day. So we started Tulerie because women have been sharing clothes their entire lives. You share with your sisters, your best friends, your cousins, and you do clothing swaps all the time. We've all been doing it, so why not just expand your network? So we started Tulerie with the idea of, we're going to curate our group of women and we're going to curate the closet. So first, we FaceTime interview every person that comes on, because it's very important to us that they understand our mission, that we are not a place to get cheap clothes. We are a give and take. You must contribute pieces to the closet to be able to borrow pieces from the closet. And if you don't understand that, then we know that you're not fit to be in our community. So we FaceTime people, and most people get in, some people don't get in. Their values just don't line up with ours. And because of that, and because of requiring people to put in items, that's how you really know that you can trust people, because they
So smart. Because
Yeah.
I would always, there's like, we were talking about it earlier, like if you have friends where you're like, you can borrow these things, you
Right.
can't borrow those.
Yeah, and because if you're constantly loaning out to people, you're like, but how do I know if you're not actually taking the time to invest in these pieces? You don't know what it feels like to spend that much money on something. You don't know what it feels like when you actually tear that piece, or you don't know what it feels like to lose it, or whatever it is. So you have to be willing to take that risk and to put pieces in to let people borrow, to be able to take pieces out. Do you wanna
Just
jump in?
logistically speaking, for the people who don't really understand Tulerie, sounds a great overview, but we're based on USPS, so we have members all over the US, and everything's shipped back and forth. So we are app-based, you list things, so it still stays in your closet, we don't hold anything, so you always have access to it. You approve every rental that comes to you, so most of the girls on our platform are listing things that they just bought, that they might have it earmarked for an event in a month, so they want to start making their money off of it, so they list it right away because they know they've had the experience of renting with our community, they trust everybody that's on there. So you list something, you get a request, you have to approve it, you can deny it, and then we don't use any packaging, and that was a really intentional and important decision that we made personally. We just felt like with all of the shopping that people do on Coda or Net-a-Porter, Amazon, we get boxes to our houses on a daily basis. Let's just give those one more life. So we don't care that it's not pretty. Like the whole unboxing phenomenon, to me, is just horrible. So we wanted to nix that. Just use one of the boxes, and we explain that to our users. Like, don't be surprised if it comes in this like random Amazon box. That was purposeful. So we try to make it a really simple process, so that now sharing clothes is a possibility.
How do you see the impact of this on retail, and how are you, because you work on the retail side of things and on the brand side of things. So how are you kind of riding that line of helping brands get into retail, helping retail expand their reach when this type of thing is also available?
Yeah, well, I actually see when you think about like how market share grows, oftentimes we think about industries as like static, and it's like, oh, Tulerie's gonna get this percent and Rent the Runway gets this percent. In fact, what these guys are doing is kind of making the pie a bit bigger and tapping into additional resources that we hadn't really considered as an option. So I'll give you another example that kind of happened previously in like the retail era, right? It's like in the beginning, like 10 years ago, not the beginning, so 10 years ago, you didn't really see a lot of like outlets, right? Or even like 12 years ago. It's like, it's like some little like crappy place you would go to with like J. Crew or something.
Like
right?
an outlet mall.
An outlet mall.
Okay.
Not the ones for your company.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that all of a sudden, right, when you had all this new product that was being marked down, what do you do with it? And all of a sudden the recession happened and everyone went straight to the outlets and then basically just created this whole new business out of thin air, right? Everyone thought the outlet business would take away from full price stores. In fact, it actually just tapped into another market share of customers who were looking to find a way to engage in the market and buy the brands that they love. So I kind of see this in the same respect, there's not really taking from someone who wants to shop, in fact, people are still buying things, right? And kind of.
Oh, and we have their closets, so we know they're buying. They're putting it all on Tulerie.
Totally.
They're shopping a lot.
Well, and so when retailers actually stopped to look, and so we did this research, we just had our 1 year anniversary a few months ago, and so, thank you. And so we took the time on that to go back and look at our inventory, and we looked at everything that was posted, and 56% of it was new in stores within the last 12 months. From our launch date to our 1 year anniversary, 56% of our inventory was new that year. So we know that people are buying and immediately putting it on. It's not theory, it's fact. And so what we're telling retailers and trying to get them to understand is, we are your partner, because now women understand that they can spend more because they can earn on that. So, and you're gonna earn a return on what you're spending if you actually take the time to invest, because then you can put it into the marketplace and you can get something back. So we're not a threat, we are actually a friend.
That's so true, because then you're also seeing people that are like, oh, look at all these different tastemakers wearing this one dress like 7 different ways.
Right.
And I'm sure that's probably really interesting for you too, from this perspective of being able to like look at these racks and say like, spring's coming up. There's one hot pink dress, and I'm not a pink person, but I'm sure you could make that pink look good on me, and like figure out how that could be my vibe, and it's something that I might need at some point.
100%. Yeah, I mean, we also talked about Rent the Runway today and how it's like the customer, it's kind of a specific client, and you guys have such a kind of like a more unique buy, or a more unique collection. And so I think for me, just seeing the brands that you guys carry versus like, I'm not a Rent the Runway customer. I don't want to dress like everyone else. And some of my clients, they
So
do,
how
like,
would you, sorry, I'm totally interrupting you.
Oh, I'm so
How
sorry.
would you compare the items that they have on Tulerie versus Rent the Runway? You said that you're not a
I
Rent the
think
Runway
it's
customer.
more. I think it's more unique and more elevated.
Okay.
So we discussed today. We had a really nice chat earlier, and we discussed that like Proenza Schuler and Jonathan Sinclair are probably some of the like most elevated brands on Rent the Runway. So I think for me, like a lot of my clients I'll go into a closet and I'll educate them on what they can keep and what they should get rid of. A lot of the time too, it's like, you know, something's either gone out of style and I just don't really see a purpose, or like there might be like moths in the closet and there's holes, and it's just like there are some times where things are just, it's time to go, and so I'll have them put together 3 piles before I get there if they can do it for me. And it's like the things that, you know, the condition is just not at a place where it should be worn anymore, so that's kind of like the Goodwill stash. And then there's the pieces that, you know, they think they like, but they just have never worn. They want to have, like, they want to see if it's just because it doesn't fit them, or, you know, what the reason is of why they haven't worn. And then there's also the pieces that still have the price tags that they know they love, but they also just need help. So it's like, there's the things that they're questioning in the middle, and then there's the things that they know they want to keep, but they just need more help with like how to wear those items. And so I think for me, when I go in, say somebody's like, I have a $5,000 budget, but I have these 3 weddings. There's a wedding in Jackson Hole, there's a wedding in Cabo, and there's a wedding in LA. It's like, you know, it'd be nice to be able to use the dresses from the site so that then the client could invest in like a Bottega shoe, and then I could also teach them how to wear those and like bring that back into their wardrobe. So I think it's a really great option to be able to mix and match like new with old, and teach the client what they have and what they should keep, and then, you know, being able to mix and make so many new looks. And also, like you said, yeah, exactly. And like you said, like, I'm not a pink person, but there might be an occasion where I feel like a pink dress is amazing, and I can style it in a certain way that it makes me feel pretty. So it's great for a weekend, but I don't need to buy it because I'll wear it one time.
Do you guys share pictures of what people look like wearing the outfits?
Some people do.
Yes.
So the user can upload a photo.
Yes,
When you do a
that's
review, you
nice.
can upload the photo.
You have to review as the owner and the borrower, or lender borrower. You have to review every transaction. So if you borrowed something, you have the option to leave a photo.
That's nice. Then you can get a little like taste of like, oh, I actually could do that.
Yeah, but there's also messaging on the app too. So especially if you need to discuss fit, maybe you're a little more petite, if you're tall like me and you want to know where something falls within you, you can have that conversation with them before you rent it, and just say, you know, I'm 5'9", how tall are you? Where did this fall on you? Did you wear 4-inch heels or did you wear flats? But you do have 24 hours. If you get something that doesn't fit, you don't like it, whatever the reason, so long as you put it back in the mail within 24 hours and you're refunded less than shipping.
Oh, that's really smart.
awesome. Okay.
I have a question. So I love this that you're going through the like things that still have tags on. How do we give these lives and save them? Which is also like an interesting way to like, okay, I bought this, and before I just trash it, what do I do with it that could give it more life?
Oh, there's also, going back to that, there's another trick where, especially in LA, you can reverse the hangers once you've worn it. Some people don't like it because they don't think the closet looks as like clean and organized, but somebody taught me this years ago where like you start with a question mark, and then when you wear the item, you turn it around. So it's a really great way to analyze the items that you've worn and the items you haven't worn. If you're kind of like, because like I feel like we always make excuses to do that. Yeah, we always make excuses like, oh, but if I have the perfect occasion to go to or whatever, I do it all the time. I was telling you guys today, my closet looks like I do so many closets that my closet looks like the 27 dresses closet when they open the doors, and it's like everything kind of like is out with prints and color and everything. But I think that that is super helpful if you can kind of, it's like you testing yourself, right? It's like you, after 6 months, you're like, wow, I haven't worn this. You know, either you sell it or you rent it.
Or in those
which-
6 months while you're waiting for that question mark occasion, and
Yeah.
you make a couple
Yeah,
$100
exactly.
somebody else is wearing it.
Exactly,
And then you still have it when
100%.
that occasion happens.
100%. So I think that that's like kind of an interesting way to kind of test yourself and also show like.
And also to say like how much you're spending and buying on clothes, and you're like, I'm actually not wearing any of these, and I'm wearing the same 4 things all the time, so why am I buying more things? Which is a question I have for you, of like, when we're thinking of how much we're purchasing, is there, I'm sure you are like far more advanced than anyone, but for the average consumer, it's 2 parts. As we're thinking of how to become more conscious with our consumption and renting things from friends, renting things from our friend network, now we can add that into the mix. Are there certain goals we should be working towards of how we can be more conscious with our consumptions, besides just like, just don't buy things anymore or don't buy anything new? And then the second question is, when we're getting rid of things and we have like the Goodwill pile, where should we actually take them? And how do you actually make sure that things aren't just going to a landfill somewhere?
Right, great question. In terms of consumption, obviously the rule of thumb is try and buy less, right? And this demands that we know our own personal styles. Because if you think about your own consumption, we all grew up in the eras of Forever 21s and Zara's, where there's always a mannequin or visual marker of what you should be wearing, right? So I always like to talk about 30 wears per item. This is like an industry standard within sustainability we talk about.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
30 wears per item.
Yeah, as a minimum, right? And so that's one thing. When it comes to how to dispose of clothes, I think in the West we have this notion that, oh, people in the third world need these items to send it, but that's actually doing a lot of damage, because even those countries where these often get shipped off are literally now saying, please stop it. They don't have the same sophisticated landfill models to dispose of these things. There's literally piles of clothes in other countries. And so there's a few different pointers here. The first thing is try and swap it with a friend, as you mentioned, right? We have our own networks. See if you could give it new life. The second one is downcycle it or upcycle it. Upcycling being, can you tailor this, change it up in some sort of way where it gets more life?
Okay, if you don't know how to do that,
Yeah.
how do you even like start that kind of a process? I have like a bag of things where I'm like, I don't wear any of this.
Yeah,
I have no idea what to do with it.
right.
We're gonna have a tailor coming here twice a month. That's gonna
Here?
Yeah, it's gonna be
Oh.
able to start like altering members' clothes.
That's super cool.
So that will help with like anyone that's gained or lost weight and they want to like
Oh my God, I have
keep
so
pieces
many
in their
jeans.
wardrobe. Yeah. So like, because a lot of the clients I visit, they have stacks of jeans or stacks of pants.
So is that something that you could just take to like the dry cleaner? Or like
Yeah.
where do you go to give something a second life?
Yeah, so tailors are out there, right? Dry cleaners often have a tailor on site. But if you're not so savvy of upcycling it, there's downcycling. So those old t-shirts make great rags. Think about repurposing it in those ways. Then there
Is there
are
a place to, sorry, I'm totally interrupting everyone. Is there a place to go that we could look and see, I'm sure on your blog, of like, here are ways to downcycle this?
Oh yeah, I have blogs about this.
Can you tell everyone what your blog is?
Yeah, my blog is called adimay.com, adimay.com. There's also companies like TerraCycle, which collect clothes that you don't want and they repurpose it by selling it on the material level. That is a really great way.
So they have a standard, like these can't be stained or
No,
holes
they're really open because they kind of do the sorting internally. So that's a great way to make sure it's not just ending up in a landfill.
That's
So,
super
Tulerie
interesting.
partners with one. It's based in Long Island in New York. It's called Rewearable. They support adults with learning disabilities, so it's these adults that are doing the sorting.
This is so good.
So Tulerie, if you email Tulerie, whether you're a member or not, we will email you. We will send you a FedEx label. So you just throw your stuff in the box and send it off to them. The cost is on us. It's going to be free to you. But nothing that they get goes into a landfill, and they take everything from clothing to sheets and towels to shoes. It's really like underwear that is the only thing that they don't take, but they will guarantee that nothing goes into a landfill. So if you have anything, throw it in a box and we'll send you a label.
Will you guys say both of those companies again? Rewearable?
Rewearable.org.
And TerraCycle, TERRA cycle.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
That's
the
great.
less,
Okay.
yeah. the
So
less-
don't go to Goodwill, don't drop the stuff off, give it to a place where it's gonna give it a second.
Yeah, but when it does come to donating it, when there are certain calls for particular items, your local shelter needs coats, winter's coming up. Look for more targeted calls for items, because when you just create a whole like plastic bag of things you don't need anymore, the percentage of that that's actually going to go into the Goodwill's resale market is actually quite low. Most things are shipped overseas, which is wreaking havoc environmentally and socially in other places.
So you might as well just be putting it in your garbage bin outside.
Not necessarily. That's when the TerraCycles of the world is better, right? And then that's a whole
But I
more.
mean, like if you're dropping off at Goodwill, like you,
Oh, in terms of
you're like not really
equivalent.
doing much.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think only 20% or maybe even less is resold.
Yeah, so statistics like that. But yeah, really look for what are the specific needs in my community. Especially with folks that are homeless, sometimes if you just ask them, what are the sorts of things that you need? Socks is a big thing they need. Jackets when the winter is coming up. Have that conversation, you know, because I think we have a lot of assumptions as consumers of, oh, just send it somewhere else. But ask questions, and there are targeted needs in our community as well.
I think for me, something that's really helpful is picturing the 8 to 10 things that you would always put in your suitcase. So when you're buying something new, or like if
Well,
you're
that's a
keeping
good
something
idea.
that you love, it's like, I mean, that would easily get to 30 items, because it's like, you know, if it's your favorite white t-shirt, that's something that you can easily buy over and over again to replace, because you're getting so much wear out of it. So it's like keeping those like 8 to 10 pieces in your wardrobe. You know, for me, I always suggest like a great black leather jacket, a denim jacket, and kind of having those items that you always know you're throwing in your suitcase. And those to me are things that like after a period of time, it's okay to like bring those, like to purchase a new item for that.
So then in the design world, in the retail space, do you see your clients are starting to take kind of that model of like, this is something that someone will wear 30 times? Like, what are these basics that we need to, are they shifting and reshaping so that they're targeting more basics as consumers become more conscious of their purchases?
I think the biggest phenomenon has been the introduction of the capsule collection. You know, I think in the last 3 years or so, there have been so many new businesses that are launching, which is far more sustainable.
Can you explain the concept of capsule?
So the concept of a capsule collection would be, let's say, about 8 to 10 different items. A top, a bottom, a jacket, maybe you get 3 or 4 different tops in there. And essentially it's a wardrobe that's created that you can mix and match almost the entire collection and wear the entire collection, let's say, for the whole season. And what's interesting about this is it's not only great for creativity, because it lowers the barrier to entry to market for a smaller sustainable brand to be able to produce these products, not have high inventory, but it also really promotes this modularity, right? And I think that one of the biggest things now is how modular are you with your wardrobe, right? Just like when you think about how modular you are with like Airbnb or Uber, we have this kind of like modular behavior in terms of how we're looking at commodifying our life. And so capsules, I think, not only have opened up the marketplace for a lot of new emerging sustainable brands, but also on the retailer side, have kind of proven to be there's a lot of friction there, right? So now all of a sudden you have this still ever increasing demand for new goods on the selling floor, despite the fact that over 60% of Gen Z say that sustainability is like a major factor in purchasing. It doesn't mean that it decreases the frequency of purchasing, it just means that they're looking at other like areas of
They're
what it
taking it into
means.
consideration.
Exactly, they're like, is it organic? Okay, I might still buy 50 of them. Right? So when you start to think about what these rules are, right? So the capsule collection, to kind of circle back to it, it's kind of like really built and made for this direct-to-consumer model, right? It's really meant for the conscious shopper. It's meant for someone who's looking to live a bit lighter in life. But the retail stores are still stocking, you know, brands that are able to produce and deliver every other month, you know? So I think there's a little bit of friction there, but I do think that more and more brands are kind of opting for this capsule collection route. And I'm interested to see how retailers kind of continue to respond.
As consumers, I mean, you were talking about like we all have these like Amazon boxes and shopping boxes that are being delivered to our homes. I mean, I try not to order anything because of the amount of Amazon boxes on people's doorsteps gives me anxiety. Where do you see, for anyone too, of how we're purchasing? Are we being better? Obviously, we're all not just going to stop buying things. But as we're starting to purchase things, is it better to be going to the retailer? I mean, all these brands are also direct to consumer instead. And how are we being more conscious with our consumption, but also supporting the brands that we appreciate, who a lot of times are direct to consumer, with the environmental impact, I mean, you could probably speak to like more of the things that we should also be conscious of as consumers, which has now become a 10-part question for everybody. Go.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to what you said in terms of capsule collection, that really speaks to the idea of cost per wear. If it's a basics, investment piece that you're gonna wear for years to come, it's worth the higher price point. But in terms of just carbon footprints and how we could be more conscious consumers, shopping local has always been a big one, right? Whether we're shopping secondhand locally, you driving to something in a 10-mile radius, buying something, giving it a second life is huge. Local creators, local makers, the idea of shopping small is huge. Something that I've seen the rise of is companies becoming carbon neutral, offsetting all of their carbon footprints when it comes to shipments. But now I think even, the world feels like it's on fire. Is carbon neutrality enough? The idea of climate positivity, right? Like the fact that you're actually having a more positive impact. So we're not just going to cover, the amount of carbon we emit, but try and make it a better impact on the world. That's a huge conversation in consumers, because I think that within the consumer mindset in sustainability, a lot of consumers are becoming very critical of greenwashing, which is this idea that, brands take the language of sustainability, organic, green, what does this stuff even mean? There's often not an industry standard, but they use it to try and, fulfill sales. And so I think consumers are becoming quite critical of, okay, you say it's sustainable, but what does that mean in practice? You say it's ethical, but show me your supply chain. So I think
we were talking about that right before the discussion started. What are things that we should be conscious of, and then to your point too, where like what, and then what do you do about it?
Yeah, and also
Like,
who do
once
you
we get that
listen to?
information,
Yeah,
what do you
I feel like I've seen so many different like rating things, where it's like, okay, this person says this one is a don't buy, right? And then like this other place, and this other place says like it's okay, right? So like, how do you know?
Yeah, I mean, like with capsule collections, I feel like my clients, they buy each one from different brands.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, well, I want to try this one and I want to try this one. And then they end up having
the whole
so much product. And, or they could have just used my advice and I could have told them my favorite. But instead they have, 10 different shirts from or different brands. And I feel like they're wearing them like once or twice and then
it's the same problem.
they're not using it. Yeah, so I feel like, I don't know, the capsule collection, to me, it's not always like the best investments or I feel like for me I always place it too in like price points. So there's certain brands where you can wash. Like I used to there's a brand called I work a lot with men. It's probably like 65 or 70% men, and guys they're not as comfortable with washing sometimes, so it's really nice when the shrinkability or like if it's like pre-washed and pre-shrunk, or like when people are traveling, to have something that doesn't wrinkle is amazing for men or for women. But I think that's a huge and a very sellable, if you have a suit that doesn't wrinkle, like Prada now has these travel suits, and you can literally roll it into a bag, and I feel like that has so much wearability and it will last for a really long time. But it's also like, if it's not wrinkling, you'll end up wearing that all the time, and it's great for travel. So I feel like there's like all these different elements too that are really helpful, as far as like, you don't have to buy as much, you can just style it in many different ways. So I feel like that's also like, that's my job, to help people learn how to wear things going from day to night, or wearing things in different ways. But I don't always feel like having so many capsules from so many brands is the solution, because some of the people I work with, they just are like, well, what's the best t-shirt? And then they'll just try each one and see, and then that ends up, and then that ends up, you have a ton of products, and you end up getting rid of like all but your favorite. So
That's why this is so amazing that you can give it 30 lives by just throwing it on an app.
There's a ton of chatter out there, and like when we started this 2 years ago, nobody was talking about, like, it was just like starting to come to the forefront. And I think for people who are a little confused and what to follow, your guidepost should be reduce, reuse, recycle. No matter what you're hearing from the brands, like recycling is your last step. Like reduce, like how can I reduce? How can I reduce? So for us, that's just don't buy new every time. Like find a different outlet, and it's not even just Tulerie. Go to the Real, go to a vintage store. Just don't buy new every time. And then if you can't do that, then reuse. How can you reuse something?
Yeah.
How can you wear it? So
I mean, that's
many
like when I first do a closet clean out, it's how you can wear the things you have first, and then what you, based on like what you're getting rid of, I always do a spreadsheet of like, and I list from importance to like least importance what you need to invest in, and then I'll give different price points. I don't feel like sustainability is like the number one thing that clients I've worked with have asked for, but at the same time, I guess it's technically, they're not saying I want to work with a sustainable brand, but then they are being as sustainable as they can, or they are showing signs of sustainability and they're trying to keep as much as they have and then incorporate that with new.
And going back to your question of like what consumers should be looking for, I think that there's some guidelines we could have on like the material level of like what type of fabrics, because the natural fabrics of the world, like silk, wool, cotton, linen, as opposed to polyester, is a lot better. And if we're looking at this through an environmental lens, polyester does not break down, it just gets smaller and smaller. And then that's the whole other can of worms of the amount of microplastics in our oceans are predominantly because of polyester and clothing, blah, 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 blah. So I often talk about the material level, so that's your sustainability. When it comes to the ethics of like supply chain, labor practices, fair trade is a good certification that people in the supply chain are being compensated fairly. When it comes to how things are being dyed, because there's a lot of chemical runoff when it comes to factories, there's certain certifications like.
And what should you look for with how things are being dyed?
So the OEKO-TEX certified is what I was going to talk about. OEKO-TEX is a type of third-party certification that basically is very like top-of-the-line safe, things that aren't putting harsh chemicals into the environment, and there's a very particular treatment process, so they try to reclaim a lot of water. I don't want to get too much in the jargon of what these factories are doing, but these are some certifications. So OEKO-TEX, fair trade, and then look for natural fabrics, because polyester is one of those things that's like, if I were to reduce this conversation on the most basic level, everything we create either goes back to the earth as food or poison, right? And obviously it's a lot more nuanced than that. Performance gear, etc., there's a need for polyester. Try to think of how can we go beyond virgin materials. So like recycling plastic water bottles. But the more you wash these like polyester items, that's a lot of microplastics. So I just try and really hone in on natural fabrics are the way to go. Yeah.
And do you see that in a trend with all of the brands that you work with and with the retail space of how they're buying or the companies that they're supporting or bringing in? Are people leaning more into supporting brands that are using natural fibers and fair trade and say the last one?
OEKO-TEX.
OEKO-TEX.
Yeah, so a lot of the charge is being led by like smaller retailers. So when it comes to like market trends and consumer behavior, normally it's like there are a few key small stores that'll kind of set the trend, and then like the larger buyers from the other stores will be like, oh, what are these cool new retail stores popping up with, or what brands are they carrying? So definitely I've been seeing a lot more smaller brands kind of gaining steam in this space. I think the hard thing, and also to your point earlier about greenwashing, is that a lot of big retailers have taken to branding themselves as having organic or natural-like things, when it's truly not the case. So consumers are being fooled into thinking they're buying something that's better for the environment. But I think the thing that I've been noticing the most is, especially with the brands that we work with, is we tell them, hey, if you're going to do all the 20 things that you need to do to make your product of the utmost, like highest quality, you need to be ready to price that at a certain price point. Because to be able to fully be able to kind of own that supply chain in the most holistic way possible can be expensive, which therefore kind of forces you to raise up your prices in order to be able to be profitable. And so a lot of the work that we do is kind of honing in on values, right? Like, what is the thing that's the most important to you? What are the 3 things? What are the 5 things that this brand or company really stands for? And then how do you kind of build your communication in a very authentic way with the consumer so that you're not overselling or overpromising, but you're making good on the things that you do? And my question earlier about, how do you kind of choose what brands to work with? I was on one site that said Everlane, don't buy from them because they're missing the mark on X, Y, and Z. But then another company said, well, buy from Everlane because they're committed to 0 CO2 emissions and they're doing X, Y, and Z. And so clearly these are 2 different points of view right? Because the two different value points are different, right? Someone's looking at maybe supply chain, someone else is looking at environmental impact.
Yeah. There's a huge gap in the market in terms of like a trusted source, right? Because one example I have is, who's familiar with the Good On You app? It's like a app that tells you, like it ranks brands essentially. Well, they're completely volunteer run in terms of their investigators that rank brands. That presents a huge issue because that's a whole conversation in itself of like how they're compensating people that are putting in a lot of labor. But as it stands now, sustainability is very subjective on how you define that. And so I think a lot of consumers are looking for the sustainable fashion bloggers of the world to kind of be that intermediary of like, what do I look for? But that goes back into the issue of all of the onus cannot just be on the consumer, because there are way too many like terms and things to know about. But I think that consumer education is growing. Sometimes brands do need to lead that education, but that's when you are in another weird ground where if brands are leading the education around this, are they going to twist it for their own benefit and profit?
Right.
So honestly, there's a huge gap in the market for that, because I can't point to any third-party like auditor. There are, again, the certifications of the world, but how much of that is part of the mainstream consciousness for consumers? That's up for debate.
So I worked for Net-a-Porter and they have Net Sustain.
Mhm.
So what does that, how does a brand get into Net Sustain, and is it credible for the brands that are on that?
Yeah, so a lot of big retailers like that have their own that are popping up. And honestly, I can't speak to that one specifically, but I would say like look at what their indicators are. They often rate it like environmental and then labor, supply chain, and then like, is this basic styles that are like, the Everlanes are supposed to be like capsule wardrobe in a way. Like they list their factories, but the factories aren't like necessarily ethically made. That's a huge other like investigation that happened, is sometimes there was addresses for factories that when people went to find, nothing was there. And so in terms of what I could point you to, I wish there was something. One thing that recently came up is there's an organization called Remake. Remake.world is their website. And this is a team of women that have occupied the sustainability space for decades. They work for the International Labor Organization. And so they're creating their own stamp of approval, but they're not, it's not tainted by affiliate marketing, which is the other thing about Good On You, is it's volunteer run and it's affiliate marketing, which creates a whole huge conflict of interest, right? Because if you're trying to sustain your business through this, can we really trust that? And so Remake is probably one of the next upcoming ones that could be like what consumers can look to, that have a really good track record of not being associated with brands on the sales level.
And there's also like cool things in technology, like, the circular ID and kind of ways that now consumers, like a lot of bigger companies now.
What's circular ID?
It's basically like an RFID chip, and it basically allows you to, it's basically traceability on sourcing on every product, right? So you can kind of see.
Oh, like where this was made, where the ingredients were sourced.
You can kind of trace the entire, so the tech industry, I think, is something that's also going to have scale change here, right? It's like, I think there's a groundswell of interest. But as you kind of leverage, let's say, the Silicon Valleys of our country here and around the world, to be able to like, how do we kind of hack this in a way that allows it to scale, so you're not kind of sitting up against a team full of interns that are trying to rate products and aren't getting paid, right? And so I think there's a lot to be said about the convergence between like cultural like transformation forward and like consumers asking for the right things, and then technology, so companies like Tulerie and like other like tech companies that are launching and saying, how do we scale this kind of cultural momentum? And hopefully through like that adopting onto larger like companies, and like it just starting to hit, I think it needs to go mass market. I think one of the biggest issues is sustainability can be expensive. And I think until a lot of brands, kind of like big mass market brands, start to do traceability, then I think we'll see some big changes.
I wanted to add to this. So going back to your first conversation, I saw a movement in the last few months where companies are publishing the wages of who makes the most and who makes the least. I want to know what the lowest wage in a company is. Because when you have billionaire CEOs, but your supply chain garment workers, who are the soul of the fashion industry, are making a few cents per piece, there's an issue there. So I think we need a whole interrogation of how we value labor. And that's tied to a conversation of race, class, gender. Because if you look at who are the garment workers in our world, That's a conversation that's very much entrenched with how colonization has evolved, how in LA, the garment industry is LA's second biggest industry, over 50,000 workers. What's the average rate there? $5 an hour. Is that legal? No. But workers are paid per piece they make, right? And that piece rate is often 2 to 3 cents per piece. And because most workers are undocumented, when they try and speak out, they're threatened with deportation. So that's the lens that I'm looking at in my work, is it's like we have to look at social structures, right? Because it's a lot more layered. I think another thing is influencer culture. There was recently a piece I helped release about Fashion Nova, which produces in LA, which is complicit in those piece rates in LA, workers making $5 an hour. We talked to the CEO of Fashion Nova. They talk about the reason we produce in LA is we need fast turnaround time, because when Kim Kardashian wears something, we need to have it out in 2 weeks. So I always break down my work 3-pronged. Consumer education, right? Reorienting our relationship to consumption and how we value ourselves, and you look at influencer feeds. They all look at one of 3 ways, right? Like the same poses, same filters, but also this idea of you constantly have to be wearing new stuff. That needs to change. I want to see that conversation. The second one is workers' rights, which is something that we often mostly don't talk about, but I put a lot of my efforts in organizing with garment workers, because garment workers are going to be the whistleblowers when things are wrong in factories. How do we know as consumers, right? So building workers' power. The last is corporate.
How do we do that?
So there's a lot of worker organizations, not a lot. There are some worker organizations, like the one I work with is the Garment Workers Center. If you could give your time or your money, either one of those two, both those to the center, they are doing the work to organize these workers. When there are wage theft instances, they take it to court. They are working on policy that would radically shift the landscape in LA on a legal level, have more enforcement. Even if you're undocumented, you are entitled to the minimum wage. You have all the rights as any other worker. People don't know that. So we have education clinics, things like that.
So if you're donating your time, what are you doing when you're donating your time?
So we have a lot of protests and actions, right? If you have a platform on social media, promote it. We need people on the streets, and maybe I'm talking as a traditional organizer, but I think there's a lot of power in grassroots actions, because that relates to media translation. If you have a huge crowd, think about the Women's March, right? When we have our actions in LA, the turnout is people who are directly being affected. There's an issue in that, right? And then the last thing is corporate accountability, internal change, right? What are the governing values? How do companies, measure progress? And that goes back to things like traceability, understanding how wages are distributed. Because some of the biggest brands in the world probably have the capacity to own their whole supply chain, but why don't they? Maybe that's something you could speak on, because my perspective is always consumer driven and garment worker driven. I'm not as much in the boardrooms, obviously, but I think that's a huge conversation we need to be having. But consumer demand is going to change corporate accountability. Consumer demand is what's going to stand in solidarity with garment workers that don't have voice in our society structurally.
Do you have certain brands that you feel really strongly about, supporting, that we could support as if we were to purchase something and going through the whole steps, they're doing the right thing?
Yeah.
If I had a new client and I could support that brand,
Yeah.
what brands would you say are your top 5?
Mm-hmm.
Just so out of curiosity for people in this room, if you are purchasing, I'm just curious, because I do work with some of the bigger, I work with Moda and I work with Net-a-Porter and I work with some of these bigger stores and companies, but I love to support smaller companies or companies that are really truly sustainable.
Yeah, without going on an exhaustive list, I do have those resources on my website. A lot of them are smaller brands that it's usually 1 or 2 people that run it, and they know all their garment workers for years. A lot of are owned by people of color, because I think that when you have direct access to your supply chain, it completely changes that. So I could provide that list. It's all on my website. But it goes back to shopping small, because the smaller brands are going to know their supply chains at the end of the day.
So Creed and Kenny, so they have a brand called Volas. It's shoes, handbags, and they also do hats. Have you guys ever had any clients that have reached out about producing in a sustainable way, or
Not any clients, honestly, that reaches out with us. We're small, so we know all of our makers here are at a base out of LA. The individuals that we get the leather from, they're big on sustainability. They have a warehouse in New Jersey that comes from Italy. In terms of like cutting corners, like packaging and everything else like that, because we are a luxury brand, it's kind of hard because people do look at those things, especially as it's still emerging brand. I mean, we've been doing it for about 9 years, but we're still fairly new in comparison to a lot of the bigger brands at the price points that we're at.
Right.
So those are all things that we do try to kind of control on our end, but at the same time, because we are, it's huge, you know. But we're always constantly thinking about things. I mean, we're not mass produced. We're a very niche brand, and we are very conscious of where we buy like the materials and everything else like that. We've been with these vendors for years now, so.
Yeah, of course. I know, Karina, I know you guys are working on like a concept to give money to a charity, which I know is kind of like in the works. So that's another way that like it's an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, we're partnering up with this woman that has a foundation, and she builds wells in Sierra de Leone, and so we're gonna give 50% of each sale of a bag to her towards the well. So we're excited about that.
That's a great example of the sorts of brands, right? Like smaller brands, you know your supply chain, you know what I mean? I think that's where like, as consumers, if we have that capacity to look for brands like that, that's where like true change happens.
If you're transparent too, like we're not doing this right now, but this is what we're working towards, and like I think people appreciate hearing that. Like,
yeah, I mean, transparency is one of the biggest things that I just try to preach and practice within my own life, in all parts of my life.
Yeah.
It's just super important. Like for us, even if like a customer has like a buckle on their backpack that breaks and it was a purchase from 4 or 5 years ago, we tell them send it back, we'll get it fixed and get it back out to you. You know, so we try to keep that relationship with our customers with whatever needs, you know, that happen. Or let's say if it tears or if it's a stain, we'll tell them send it back, we'll get it fixed for you and we'll send it right back out to you. So all those little things do add up, and that's why we have those continuing customers that'll buy something and then come down a year later down the line and buy again from us. So.
And I think too with your products, like the leather gets better over time, right? So you're having these pieces in your wardrobe, like it's not just a piece that you're buying. Obviously, like it's a luxury price point, but it's also, you know, the wearability and the cost per wear ends up being like incredible because, you know, the backpacks you guys have, people are wearing those every single day. The bags, the handbags, the like little iPhone cases, you know, all those different pieces. I feel like over time the leather gets like, you know, softer and softer and more incredible, and then also once somebody's wearing it, they don't stop. So I think that that's also another way to look at, you know, how sustainable a product is.
Like this bag, it's what, 7 years old?
It's probably about 7 years old, yeah.
And it still looks brand new.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I didn't carry it for a while, and as of recent, I just threw this new chain on here that we're using on some of the new products, and I just kind of
Altered it a
repurposed
little
it,
bit,
altered
yeah.
it, and just made it more modern.
It's called
That's what I've been
upcycling.
And the name of the brand is called Valas Los Angeles.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
And thanks you guys. This is very informative for me.